Nina Schick, European political commentator, the Mirror columnist Susie Boniface, and the co-chair of Leave Means Leave and former head of the British Chamber of Commerce, John Longworth. Lovely to see you all. Very good morning. Hope you've done your Christmas shopping. Shall we start with the front page of the Sunday Times? And interesting, this actually, a very long interview on the Insight with Tim Shipman and Boris Johnson, but it's the idea that we could be left as a vassal state, a phrase that I don't think has ever been used as much as this week. Do explain.
Yes, well, Boris has made another famous intervention into the Brexit debate, and I think from reading the article, obviously I have the view from the EU as well, and I don't think it makes much logical sense, because this is fundamentally a question that the Cabinet has to decide. Where does it want to end up in its future trading relationship with the EU? Does it want to remain closely aligned, or does it not want to? Does it want to diverge from the EU? And this is something that the Cabinet itself has not decided. Of course, we had that deal last week, and we know that now we're moving on to future trade. But the reality is we are not. We will only be talking about future trade in March 2019, and essentially the Cabinet has to decide first what it wants. I mean,
doesn't Boris to an extent have a point? There was talk earlier this week about a punishment clause being inserted in whatever agreement we have, that if we decide to diverge, then, you know, there could be problems for us ahead. I mean, this is a fundamental question, as Nina says, about the relationship that we want to have with the European Union, and I thought the whole point of leaving was to get as far away from them as possible.
Yeah, divergence is a huge issue with the Northern Irish border, and then if you don't have Northern Ireland leaving in the same way the rest of the UK does, then you're not upholding the democratic vote for everyone to leave. But the issue you're going to have here with Boris is that he's doing what he's done before, is he's letting his mouth flap off at the gums. And we are currently in a position where the EU has said, we need to have some clarity from the British government. Tell us where you expect to be in 5 years' time. You all have to agree. Now, the Tories haven't been able to agree on the issue of Europe for 40 years. And Theresa May's next task, and the reason why this is the ugliest part of the negotiation, is going to be forcing her own party, the headbangers, the wingnuts, the die-hard Remainers and Leavers, to try to have some kind of a compromise and agree where they all want to be. And until she gets that, we can't move any further on. Boris immediately saying, you know, I'm off over here on the left and I'm going to do things this way, that's not going to help her at all.
I mean, what does business want, John?
Well, Boris is right in the sense that he has to put forward the view that the party has to have a very clear position about the direction of travel, because unless we understand where the UK is going before March next year, we haven't got the time to walk and adopt WTO measures, which means that part of the leverage the UK has with the EU in the negotiations disappears. We have to be very clear what the end result is, and Philip Hammond, of course, quite wrongly and damagingly for the British economy, has been pushing forward the idea that we should salvage as much of the status quo as possible, which means we can only be worse off.
You know, exactly. So, leaving aside transition, I mean, what is the best state? What is the best relationship for us to be having with Europe from a business perspective? Well, the ability to diverge, one would presume.
The very best outcome would be to have a Canada-style deal with some additional aspects related to services, if possible, not necessary, and at the same time to have as much freedom as possible for the UK to adjust its economy in the way it wants to. Trade deals elsewhere, removing external tariffs, cutting taxes and so on. That's the best outcome. The trade deal is only worth so much. If you give away too many of the freedoms and pay too much for it, actually it will damage the economy.
Let's go inside the Sunday Telegraph, shall we? And David Cameron, busy man these days, isn't he?
He's a very busy man. When he's not buying his third home in Cornwall and sitting in his £25,000 shepherd's hut.
I love that shed, I've got to say. If I had to spare 25k, I would be buying a shed like that.
My shed's falling down, and if I had 25k, I would not be spending it on another shed. But yes, he's been cleared by the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments, ACOBA as it's known. Now, this is the body set up to ensure that there isn't a revolving door in politics and in the civil service. That if, for example, you've been working as a health minister, you don't immediately walk into a job at a private healthcare firm. They do tend to do this, and the reason for that is the rules that ACOBA follow are not statutory. They're not part of the law. And they have cleared David Cameron, who allowed relaxation of visa requirements for Chinese nationals who had lots of contact with President Xi and had a big thing about the relationship with China, to walk into a job which is 2 or 3 days a month, probably pay him £1 billion a year, for a private equity fund which is going to be sorting out Chinese-British trade. And the thing is, you either assume that David Cameron is just a figurehead and didn't really do anything very much as Prime Minister, and is just there for the look of the thing, or that he knows exactly what's going on and is there and is useful to that private equity fund, in which case he's exploiting the job that he had and was doing for us. And he's doing it only 18 months after leaving office.
I mean, Nina, should David Cameron just be forced to sit in Cornwall staring out at the seas, demanding the tides turn, you know, or should we not get him out there doing something good and generate a bit of wealth for the economy?
Well, he's not as bad as Tony Blair yet, but of course, I mean, I don't think we can just condemn him to live alone in Cornwall. This is
Tony Blair was at least working in the Middle East as opposed to lining his own pocket, but you know,
as a goodwill ambassador too.
John, take us to page 4 of the Express, and a popular man in certain quarters at the moment, Jacob Rees-Mogg. His star is very high. What's this about?
Yeah, I mean, on one of the other newspapers, of course, the one we saw first, he was described in another article as a sex god. I wouldn't quite go so far as that.
I'm glad. This is a Sunday morning programme.
But he's a very nice guy.
Yeah.
And I think this article is very important because what he's really pointing out is that if we adopt a transition arrangement, which could, of course, go on forever, potentially, in which we are tied to all the European rules, we will effectively not have left. It will be a fraud on the electorate. It will be the biggest fraud on the electorate in living memory, because we'll have Brexit in name only. In order to actually benefit from Brexit, we've got to be able, as we said before, to have the freedoms to do the things that we want to do.
But isn't this partly to do with the fact that Rees-Mogg is in no way afraid of us, crashing out, as some people describe it, of a cliff-edge Brexit? And the reason for that is not because he thinks it's best for the UK economy, it's because he's ideologically committed to it.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, that construction of what you just said, crash out, you know, cliff edge, all those terms that the metropolitan elite use for these issues.
I have to say, it's putting me in the class of metropolitan elite, stretching it a little bit.
Are actually, of course, the wrong way of looking at it, because most of our trade with the world at the moment takes place under WTO rules. Actually, it's global trade, and it's very easy to do. And a lot of British firms export. In fact, 57% of our exports operate under those rules. And most of the stuff that the EU buys from the world also operates under those rules. So it's nothing to be afraid of. It's something to be embraced.
Nina?
Well, I disagree. There's no major economy that only trades on the basis of WTO rules, and there's no such thing as simply falling back onto WTO rules. And I think timestamp this. So what's going to happen is there will be a transition period unless domestic politics get so messy that we crash out with no kind of deal. And what that will mean, as far as the EU is concerned, is an extension of the status quo. But on the European side as well, it'll have to be time capped. But that means the UK remains a rule taker for the next 2 years after leaving without any say. And that is where we're going to end up, essentially.
Well, Theresa May is convening her war cabinet tomorrow, her full cabinet on Tuesday. I'm sure by Wednesday we'll know exactly what we're going to be doing. Guys, thank you very much.